Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into a story that is, well, truly unlike any other you've likely heard. It's this compelling, deeply personal saga that somehow transforms into a global blueprint for advocacy, for resilience, and a completely new way of engaging online.
Yeah, it really is extraordinary. We're tracing the journey of Alberto Daniel Hill. Now, you might recognize his name today as a prominent cybersecurity expert, but his path to, well, that prominence is just paved with immense personal adversity. It's a story that really reveals how true vulnerability, when you embrace it, can become your greatest strength.
Profound is definitely the word for it. I mean, just imagine being unjustly imprisoned, publicly vilified, losing absolutely everything, only to emerge and turn that immense personal trauma into this powerful platform for collective defense, for social change. That's Alberto's story arc.
And our mission today is really to uncover the meticulous process, the strategic digital evolution behind it all. We're focusing specifically on how his daily Cybermidnight Club deep dive itself came to be, how it evolved, and how it continues to thrive with this unique approach.
Right, because it's become this real-world masterclass
Yeah.
in using digital platforms for advocacy, and maybe more importantly, building something incredibly rare online these days. Genuine trust.
Exactly. We'll unpack how he strategically used platforms like Twitter, particularly Twitter Spaces, not just as a way to tell his harrowing story, but really to foster this unparalleled community engagement.
And crucially, how those raw, unscripted live interactions became the very backbone, you could say the wellspring, for his daily podcast, the Cyber Midnight Club.
That's it.
So this deep dive today is like a blueprint for you, demonstrating how authentic storytelling, that unwavering resilience, and strategic digital engagement can turn individual injustice into a global force for change and collective defense.
Yeah. You're about to hear how a deeply personal log into hell, as he puts it, truly became a log out to hope for so many people around the world.
Okay, so to really grasp the depth of this transformation and, the subsequent evolution of the Cyber Midnight Club itself, we have to go back to his early career in Uruguay.
Right. He was genuinely a pioneering figure, stepping into the sort of burgeoning field of IT and cybersecurity back when it was still very much uncharted territory in his country.
So what made his role so groundbreaking then? Was he just like an early tech guy, or was there something more official about it?
Oh, much more formal. He actually became the country's very first IT expert officially assigned to a cybercrime case. Think about that. The first.
Wow.
So this wasn't just some technical role, it was really foundational. It was directly tied to new cybercrime laws being implemented in Uruguay at the time, placing him right at the absolute forefront of digital forensics. He was essentially building the framework as he went, navigating these complex legal issues and technical challenges that literally no one else in Uruguay had encountered before.
Being the first, I mean, that means there's no precedent, right? No established protocols, no existing support systems for the kind of work he was doing. And the nature of that work, from what we understand, was just incredibly disturbing.
Profoundly disturbing is probably the right term. He was tasked with sifting through and counting over 3,000 images of child exploitation material. Just try to imagine the sheer volume, the horrific nature of that content day in, day out. This wasn't just data, it was, human suffering distilled into digital files that he had to meticulously process for evidence.
I honestly can't even begin to comprehend the psychological toll of that. It's not just a job at that point. It's this constant, direct confrontation with the absolute darkest aspects of humanity.
Precisely. And in his own words, he described it as mentally twisting his perception of humanity. He even said it poisoned his worldview. This wasn't some detached academic exercise for him. He was completely immersed in the grotesque reality of these crimes, and the weight of that exposure was just immense. It chipped away at his sense of safety, his belief in human goodness. It left these deep, unseen scars.
And the inevitable outcome of that kind of sustained high-intensity exposure to trauma, especially without adequate support, is often burnout, isn't it?
Exactly. By December 2014, the psychological toll was so severe that he just had to step away from that specific line of work. He had to prioritize his own mental health, which was, frankly, a brave and necessary decision. He was dealing with an unimaginable psychological burden, far beyond what any standard job description could ever prepare you for.
So this period, it laid this really complex foundation, a deep kind of visceral understanding of cybercrime's human cost, but also this profound personal vulnerability.
Yes, and that vulnerability would be tested even more tragically just a few years later. This was the first profound crisis that would eventually, and quite unexpectedly, shape the very nature and mission of the Cybermidnight Club itself, setting the stage for its focus on raw truth and victim impact.
Okay, so just a few short years after stepping away from that harrowing work, in September 2017, Alberto's life took another catastrophic turn. This event became known as Operation Bitcoin.
Yeah, this was absolutely pivotal. Alberto Daniel Hill was arrested. And the irony here is thick. Given his background fighting cybercrime, he became the first person in Uruguay to actually be imprisoned for a computer-related crime.
A crime he denies committing, right?
Yeah.
And was eventually acquitted of.
Vehemently denies it, and yes, later acquitted. But the damage was done long before that acquittal. He spent 8 months in preventative prison. And the conditions, the stress, it was harrowing, so traumatic that he actually fell into a coma.
Fell into a coma, just from the stress of imprisonment.
It's an almost incomprehensible level of physical and psychological stress. And remember, this is layered on top of the earlier trauma he experienced from his work sifting through that child exploitation material. This imprisonment pushed him to his absolute limits. The coma itself just speaks volumes about the immense pressure his body and mind were under. He was unjustly held, facing not only the loss of his freedom, but also the complete, utter destruction of his public identity.
And this wasn't just a private ordeal, was it? The public dimension, the way it played out in the media, was equally devastating. He says Uruguayan media and police press releases basically destroyed his image.
Oh, completely. They painted him as the worst cybercriminal, cyber-terrorist on Earth. It was total public vilification, a character assassination that just echoed across the entire country. And worse still, he was effectively doxxed.
They released his personal details.
His full name, his face, even his home address were publicly released. It turned him overnight from this respected cybersecurity pioneer into a complete pariah in his own country. He became a target for public scorn, maybe even physical threat.
The mental weight of that alone, the public humiliation on top of the imprisonment and the earlier trauma, it's just truly impossible to fully fathom. And adding insult to injury, he suffered huge material losses during this time too.
Absolutely staggering losses. He lost access to, and eventually millions in, cryptocurrency assets. He estimates that those assets, at current Bitcoin prices, would be worth somewhere around $10 million. So not only did he lose his freedom and his reputation, but also his entire financial security. Gone.
And what makes this whole silencing aspect even more profound is that the traditional media, the very outlets that had publicly convicted him, the court of public opinion, then refused to give him any voice, any platform upon his release.
Yeah, they effectively slammed all the local doors shut. His attempts to share his side of the story, to correct the record, were just ignored. He was left with absolutely no local platform to regain his reputation or even explain his truth. So this period, this profound injustice, the public vilification, the financial ruin, it was the ultimate test of his resilience. But unknowingly, it was also laying the groundwork for the unconventional, radically transparent path the Cybermidnight Club would eventually take. It forced him to look beyond traditional channels.
Okay, so how does someone even begin to rebuild from that level of devastation? I mean, every local avenue for vindication is just closed off. It must have felt completely desperate.
It sounds like it. And this brings us to Alberto's sort of strategic revelation, his turning point.
Or was it?
It was literally his cell phone. He realized that this device, the one he had with him coming out of prison, was actually his most valuable asset. It became his immediate link to the outside world, and crucially, his unexpected link to a potential global audience. This wasn't just, a convenience, it was a lifeline. It was a tool for survival and eventually for self-vindication.
So that's where the perspective really shifted. He realized that while his own country, just 3 million people, might not listen or maybe had already made up their minds based on that media narrative.
Exactly. He grasped this fundamental truth of the digital age. There are 7.8 billion people out there who might be willing to listen to my story. And this wasn't just some fleeting thought of hope. It was a profound strategic reframing that redefined his entire path forward. It was this intellectual pivot that turned a localized personal crisis into a potential global mission. He saw the boundless possibilities of the digital world precisely because his physical world had shut him out.
So his initial use of social media, specifically Twitter, now X, that was probably pretty raw, right? Given everything he'd just been through.
Oh, absolutely. At first, it was a completely unfiltered outlet. He used it to express what he described as all the feelings of hate and anger. And you can understand why. Imagine the immense pressure of being unjustly vilified, silenced. Those emotions must have been absolutely overwhelming. He used Twitter as this vital, understandable coping mechanism, a place to vent, to process the immense injustice and pressure he felt.
That kind of raw expression, though, while totally understandable, doesn't always lead to constructive recovery. Did he recognize that himself?
He did, and this is where you see this incredible self-awareness again. Even then, he recognized that while those feelings, the anger, the desire for revenge were natural, they wouldn't ultimately lead to true healing or constructive recovery. He openly admits the struggle lasted for years, that it faded slowly. Genuine acceptance of his profound losses, both the financial ones and the personal ones, only truly began in early 2022, which was when his very complex legal case finally closed.
So that self-acknowledgement, admitting the struggle, that's another layer of this radical transparency we'll talk about.
It really is. So this wasn't some instant transformation from victim to advocate overnight. It was a slow, incredibly arduous process of healing and, importantly, strategic refocusing.
A forced transition almost.
Yeah.
From a desperate emotional outlet to a calculated strategy.
Exactly. A strategy for global reach, for vindication, and ultimately for impact. He realized that by openly sharing his journey, even the really uncomfortable parts, he could resonate with others who were experiencing similar injustices, or maybe just those seeking truth in a world full of noise. The digital world offered him this boundless possibility when his local world had shut him out. And this strategic evolution also shaped the kind of content and the specific approach he would eventually take with the Cybermidnight Club, leading directly to its unique format and its profound influence.
Okay, so this strategic reframing, this move towards a global audience, led to a pretty profound evolution in how he communicated. Now, the Cyber Midnight Club podcast actually launched back in December 2018, but its unique style, that raw, unscripted approach, drawing directly from live interactions, that really found its footing later, didn't it, through a very unexpected catalyst.
Yes, and that catalyst, as you hinted, was the emergence of Twitter Spaces. What's truly fascinating is just how organic, almost accidental, the beginning of the podcast-defining style really was. This wasn't some polished media strategy cooked up in a boardroom.
No slick strategy document here, then. How did it actually begin?
Well, it started with an initial test space that Alberto decided to launch on Twitter. The topic he picked was romance scams, a pretty common, pervasive online danger. He later admitted he kind of intended it to be somewhat sarcastic, maybe even cynical, a jaded take on this persistent problem.
But that's not what happened at all, was it?
Not even close. What happened next was completely unexpected and frankly transformative for his approach. He describes it as an unplanned convergence. Suddenly, victims of scams, actual former criminals who had used deception as a weapon, and cybersecurity experts. They just started joining the space. They converged spontaneously, drawn to this topic.
Wow. So just by creating that space for discussion, he tapped into something much, much deeper. The conversation immediately shifted, didn't it? It pivoted from that potential sarcasm to this profoundly empathetic, organic discussion.
Exactly right. This spontaneous, totally unscripted interaction revealed this huge, unmet appetite for raw, direct conversations about sensitive, often taboo topics in the cybersecurity world. It showed there was this desperate need for a platform where people could speak openly, without fear of judgment or censorship, about their experiences with digital crime, with injustice, with vulnerability.
And this accidental success, this sort of lightning in a bottle moment, it became the blueprint for the Cyber Midnight Club's content strategy moving forward.
Precisely. The podcast, which had launched earlier, then began to really leverage the authenticity found in these spontaneous interactions. His live, unscripted interactions became the actual source material.
It became the wellspring, as you called it.
That's the perfect word for it. This is such a crucial aspect of its evolution and why it feels so different from other podcasts. Instead of, writing a script and then recording it, Alberto lets these live, unscripted, often very emotional conversations unfold in real time in the spaces. And those conversations, with minimal editing, become the daily podcast episodes.
So that method ensures this unparalleled authenticity, this direct insight you just cannot get from a traditional, more curated format.
Absolutely. It gives listeners this unvarnished window into the complex, messy realities of cybercrime, straight from the people living it.
And the environment that allows for that kind of raw, spontaneous sharing in the spaces that was fostered largely by Alberto's own approach, which you've described as radical transparency. Now, that sounds incredibly brave, maybe even risky, given his history. What does that actually mean for him in practice?
It's more than just brave. It's a deliberate, tactical core of his entire approach. It's a strategic decision, and yeah, it's risky, but it's essential for his purpose. He's willing to share intensely personal details, his past mistakes, his own vulnerabilities, his experiences, all without really holding back.
Can you give us an example? Just how unflinching is this honesty?
Well, he'll openly admit to things like having been hacked himself, which many experts might hesitate to do. But even more strikingly, he's talked about how, out of sheer curiosity years ago, he once self-hacked. He deliberately infected himself with a remote access Trojan, a RAT.
Okay, wait. A RAT, for listeners who might not know, what exactly is that?
Right, so RAT isn't just typical malware. It's a tool that gives an attacker complete covert control over your computer or device. They can see everything you do, access all your files, even turn on your camera and microphone without you having any idea. It's serious stuff.
So admitting to deliberately infecting himself with something like that, that is truly radical for someone in his position.
It absolutely is. But it's not for shock value. His motivation is crystal clear. He actually states, I share a lot of things about me, my life. I do it for a purpose. I want people to actually believe and show that I am genuine. This immediate, unflinching candor, it just disarms skepticism. And crucially, it invites others to be equally open. It creates this unparalleled safe space for vulnerable sharing within his community. When the host is that open, it really empowers others to share their own difficult stories.
And he couples that transparency with what you call the profound humility. You mentioned him saying something like, whoever claims he's an expert, he can never be hacked. My respects, but I'm not that kind of person.
Exactly. And that level of honesty, especially coming from someone who genuinely knows the digital underworld firsthand, it must be incredibly disarming for listeners. It's deeply refreshing in a field sometimes filled with bravado. Coming from someone wrongly labeled a master cybercriminal, this humility builds immense trust with an audience that might otherwise, understandably, be skeptical.
He openly acknowledges his transformation too, right? Saying he now works hard to protect people from the kind of attacker he used to be.
Yes, he's very clear about that. It's not just an admission, it's a testament to his evolution. And this transformation, this profound understanding of the real damage cybercrime inflicts, it didn't happen when he was caught or even when he was in prison. He states very clearly, it was not until I started to turn my life around and started to interact with victims that I started to understand the damage that I had done.
That's his core epiphany then.
Yeah.
The direct interaction with victims.
That's it. Talking directly to victims, hearing their stories, seeing their pain, that direct interaction fundamentally changed his understanding of the real-world impact. It moved cybercrime from some abstract concept to something deeply personal, deeply human. And that fuels his current advocacy and the entire mission of the Cybermidnight Club. He often says conventional awareness campaigns fall short because, as he puts it, criminals are better at committing crime than the common person on the street is at protecting themselves against that crime.
Which brings us to his most urgent plea, doesn't it? Stemming directly from his own past and this transformation, he urges victims to report cybercrimes.
He states it so powerfully and brutally honestly, drawing from his own history. Not reporting or not calling the police on me resulted in me keeping on going because what consequences did I have? None. That's a stark, brutal lesson learned from his past as a black hat hacker. He understands intimately that silence emboldens criminals.
So he's actively working against the shame, the victim blaming, that often prevents people from reporting.
Exactly. He highlights those alarming statistics. Only a tiny fraction, maybe 7% to 14%, actually report cybercrimes. And that silence just allows the cycle of abuse to continue completely unchecked. By providing this platform for raw, unvarnished stories, he's actively fighting that silence, breaking the stigma, and encouraging a collective, proactive stance against these digital threats.
So this radical openness, it's a calculated risk, but clearly for a much bigger purpose. Does it extend beyond the cybersecurity topics into his personal life as well?
Oh, yes, absolutely. He explicitly calls it a calculated risk. He says, I play, but always controlling and, first of all, understanding what the risk I'm exposed to and accepting that or not. And this applies very much to his personal life. Most notably, perhaps, was when he met his fiancée online. She showed remarkable trust, actually traveling to meet him without initially informing her family, despite his very public profile and, well, his notorious past.
Wow. That's an incredible testament to the credibility and trust he managed to build online through his authenticity. The fact that she took that leap of faith speaks volumes.
It truly does. And when she eventually did tell her family, their initial shock just underscored the real-world challenges his past created. His own anxiety about her safety, making sure she shared his details with her family just in case. It further underscores that this commitment to trust and transparency isn't just theory for him, it's deeply ingrained, lived experience. And this unique blend of vulnerability and expertise creates that profoundly trustworthy environment that really characterizes his spaces and, by extension, the podcast.
And this calculated risk extends professionally too, right? You mentioned him discussing old black hat techniques like SQL injection. That feels like, well, a dangerous line to walk.
It might seem dangerous on the surface, yes. But he calculates that demonstrating his deep firsthand knowledge of how criminals actually operate builds far more credibility with victims, with law enforcement, even with other experts, than any sanitized, purely academic approach ever could.
It's about showing he truly understands the enemy.
Precisely. He makes it clear that understanding the criminal mindset, how they think, how they operate, that's the first, most crucial step in effective defense. So, for example, he might discuss something like SQL injection. Now, that's a technique allowing attackers to slip malicious code into database queries, often to access or delete sensitive data. While it's considered an old vulnerability in some ways.
It's still surprisingly common, isn't it?
Exactly. Its persistence in many systems highlights the ongoing challenge of cybersecurity maintenance and the constant need for vigilance. By discussing these real techniques, he transforms his past into this powerful educational tool for the Cybermidnight Club's audience. It's not about glorifying it, it's about dissecting it for defense.
Okay, so this personal vulnerability, this radical transparency, it becomes the bedrock for these public discussions, fostering this unique form of trust. And that leads directly to how these live Twitter spaces feed his podcast, Cyber Midnight Club, correct?
Exactly right. And this is key to understanding the podcast's evolution and focus. This isn't some polished documentary pulling from carefully curated, pre-recorded sources. The podcast's content comes directly, almost verbatim sometimes, from those raw, live, completely unscripted conversations happening in the spaces.
And what does that mean for you, the listener? What's the core value, the real differentiator here?
It's just unparalleled authenticity. It's direct insight you simply can't get anywhere else. You're hearing unfiltered, often spontaneous exchanges from people who've genuinely been there, not just observers or academics reporting from a safe distance. These are real, lived experiences delivered without a script, often with raw emotion.
You're hearing directly from victims who've suffered profound betrayal, from reformed perpetrators who once used deception as a weapon, and from proactive advocates fighting these threats right now.
Yes, it's real-time, real-stakes conversations, unrehearsed revelations. And that immediacy, that lack of polish, it captures nuances and emotional truths that simply get lost in more structured, heavily post-produced formats. It's almost like being a fly on the wall during these pivotal, candid moments where you absorb the raw human element behind the technical issues. And that's why the Cyber Midnight Club feels so genuine and impactful. It's built on that foundation.
So focusing on the podcast itself, Cyber Midnight Club, how is it actually doing? What are the stats looking like, and where can people find it if they want to tune in?
Sure. So Cyber Midnight Club, as we mentioned, launched way back in December 2018, and it's incredibly active. It's updated daily, which, I mean, that's a huge commitment for this kind of content.
Daily, wow. An hour-long episode every day.
Yeah, each episode averages about an hour in length. As of July 8th, 2025, it boasts an impressive 522 episodes.
Daily, hour-long episodes for years. That level of consistent production, especially drawing from live, unpredictable spaces, is genuinely remarkable. That speaks volumes about its evolution into this core mission for him.
It truly is. In terms of overall reach, it's garnered over 100,000 total plays across all platforms combined since it started. On Spotify specifically, it's accumulated, 12,941 total plays, 7,062 streams, and over 209 hours of total consumption time. It reached a peak of 708 followers on Spotify.
Okay. What about ratings or feedback from listeners? Does that reflect this unique style?
Well, on Apple Podcasts, it currently holds a 1.8 rating from just 5 reviews. Now, that might not sound stellar at first glance, but you have to consider the niche and the raw nature. And one reviewer perfectly captured its essence, saying, "The content offers authentic narratives, presenting a perspective that captivates listeners with its genuine and unscripted feel." So that feedback really validates the unique approach.
That nails it, doesn't it? It's not about polish, it's about authenticity.
Exactly. And for listeners wanting to check it out, it's widely available across many platforms: Twitter, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Facebook, Instagram, Medium, IMDb, and even Telegram. It's really positioned itself as this daily true crime podcast by Alberto Daniel Hill, offering those firsthand insights into the dark web and expert analysis of current cybersecurity issues, all through that unscripted lens.
It's clear that the dedication to produce this daily, especially drawing from those live, unpredictable spaces, is a cornerstone of its evolution and its appeal. What about recent listener data? Can we see any trends in who's listening and where they're tuning in from?
Yeah, looking at the most recent period we have data for, from June 9th to July 8th, 2025, there were approximately 3,946 total estimated reproductions across all platforms. What's particularly insightful, I think, is the platform distribution. While the Spotify ecosystem that's combining Spotify itself and Spotify for creators accounts for around 5.35%, which is about 211 reproductions in this period, it's actually Apple Podcasts that surprisingly leads the charge.
Really? Apple Podcasts is the primary platform. That's interesting, given Spotify's general dominance in the podcast space overall.
It is interesting, yeah. Apple Podcasts accounts for a significant 34.74% of the total plays in that period, which extrapolates to about 1,371 reproductions. And Podcast Addict is surprisingly strong in second place, with 20.00% of the total, around 789 extrapolated reproductions.
So that suggests a pretty diverse audience base, doesn't it? Not just confined to one or two major platforms. Listeners are actively seeking out this unique, unscripted content wherever they get their podcasts.
That seems to be the case. It shows the content itself, that raw authenticity is the draw, regardless of platform preference.
Okay, that's a strong spread. Can you give us some specific examples? What are some of those raw conversations from the spaces that have made it into Cyber Midnight Club episodes and really resonated with the audience? What kinds of insights or maybe even unsettling revelations are hitting home?
Absolutely. And this really shows the evolution of the content based on what happens in those spaces. The podcast, fueled by these authentic conversations, covers this huge range of urgent, complex, and often deeply uncomfortable topics, straight from the people directly involved. So one of the most streamed episodes of all time, looking at the data, is titled Facts: The Karen Kanimba False Positive Spyware Case and Catalan Gate. That was published back in September 2022, and it got 311 streams.
Okay, so tackling high-profile, controversial spyware cases.
Exactly. This episode dives right into highly sensitive, politically charged issues, specifically looking at the complexities of attributing spyware attacks in these really high-profile international cases. It just showcases the podcast's willingness, maybe even its core function now, to tackle controversial subjects head-on, providing a platform for perspectives on the intersection of cybersecurity, politics, and human rights that you often don't hear elsewhere.
And the second most streamed episode is incredibly personal to Alberto himself, isn't it? It's titled S01 User 4 English: Prison Nights and Prison Sounds. That must truly capture the raw essence of his own story.
It really does. It has 310 streams. Published back in June 2020, this episode gives listeners this direct, incredibly raw account of Alberto's own harrowing experience in prison. It's like an unfiltered auditory journey into his confinement, connecting listeners directly to the emotional core of his personal struggle. It demonstrates the very foundation of that radical transparency we talked about, the thing that defines the podcast. It's a testament to how his personal saga became public education, forming the bedrock of the club's identity.
So the audience is clearly drawn to both the highly technical political stuff and the deeply personal. What's next on that top streamed list? How does it show the diversity of content?
Well, number 3 is interesting. Horas at TagBitsXYZ as special guest, and we will talk about his service that connects hashtag Tezos artists and collectors using the power of tags. That's from November 2022, with 307 streams. This shows a completely different facet of the podcast's evolution, right? It's focusing on emerging technologies like blockchain, specifically Tezos, and NFTs, and how they foster new kinds of digital communities. It proves the podcast isn't just about the dark side of cybercrime. It also explores the broader digital landscape and its innovations, again, through direct conversations with people involved. Then, number 4 brings us back to the human impact. IMDb True Story about cyberstalking: the extent to which an abuser will use technology to control a victim. This one's from April 2021 with 306 streams. This really highlights the podcast's commitment to amplifying victim stories and showing the real-world, often horrifying impact of cybercrime. It specifically explores the insidious nature of cyberstalking and how technology is weaponized in domestic abuse situations.
That's incredibly important work. And finally, rounding out the top 5, there's an episode that speaks directly to his personal vindication journey.
Yes. es 01 y 03, Alberto el hacker de Uruguay. Mi historia contada por expertos de España que desmienten lo divulgado, español. That's from January 2021, also with 306 streams. This episode focuses explicitly on his long journey towards clearing his name. It features cybersecurity experts, specifically from Spain in this case, who actively debunk the public narrative that was built around him in Uruguay. They use their expertise to dissect the inconsistencies and falsehoods of his initial portrayal by the media and authorities.
So it's not just vindication for him, but it also serves as a crucial lesson for listeners, doesn't it? About media bias, the fallibility of public narratives, and the real challenges of dealing with digital evidence in legal systems.
Absolutely. It's a powerful case study woven into his own narrative.
That is quite a range, from deeply personal vindication and trauma to emerging tech to global spyware controversies, all while maintaining that core of raw authenticity derived from the spaces. Let's really dig into some of these content examples now. Can you walk us through what made an episode like, say, cartel surveillance, FBI-informed governments targeted in Mexico City resonate so strongly? What kind of chilling real-world insights did that offer listeners?
Right, so that episode, born directly from a Twitter space discussion, revealed truly terrifying alleged criminal innovations. The conversation centered on these chilling allegations, and we should stress they are allegations discussed in the space about how the Sinaloa cartel, potentially through compromised government officials, might have exploited Mexico City's vast network of public surveillance cameras.
Wait, they were using public cameras for their own criminal enterprise? How would that even work? How was that discussed?
Allegedly. According to the space discussion, they repurposed these public safety systems to meticulously track and then brutally target FBI informants operating in the city. Just imagine the sheer audacity and sophistication required. A major criminal organization potentially using the very infrastructure designed to protect citizens as a tool for violence and intimidation. For many listeners hearing that discussion, it just shatters any lingering trust in those public safety systems.
That's terrifying.
And it didn't stop there. The space also delved into discussions about these cartels potentially developing their own advanced private cellular networks. Think about that, creating completely untraceable communication channels. This points to an alarming level of criminal innovation and infrastructure that could grant them even greater impunity. It showcases the frightening capabilities of modern organized crime in the digital age, stuff you just don't hear about normally.
Truly disturbing. The idea that public infrastructure could be so compromised. Now, for many of our listeners, the immediate concern is often more personal, protecting themselves from digital deception, from scams. What kind of insights does the Cybermidnight Club offer there, drawing from these raw conversations?
That's another huge ongoing focus, and it's perfectly exemplified by an episode titled something like Decoding Digital Deceptions, Scams, Cybersecurity, and Safeguards. These spaces go deep, really deep, into both the psychology and the technology behind online scams. It's not just about the technical vulnerabilities people might have, it's about how fundamental human trust is systematically broken down by sophisticated scammers.
And the tactics are constantly evolving, right? Like the use of AI deepfakes.
Exactly. That's a major topic. They discuss the evolving tactics, including the genuinely frightening use of AI deepfakes to create totally convincing fake identities, fake voices, or even entirely fake video scenarios. These things prey directly on our visual and auditory trust, making scams harder than ever to spot.
So who provides these insights? Is it just experts talking theory?
No, that's the power of the format. You get unfiltered, first-hand insights from guests like Anna Rowe, who was a victim of a serious scam and transformed into an advocate sharing her direct experience. And then you might have someone like Brett Conson, a reformed, well-known ex-cybercriminal, explaining the criminal mindset from the inside. They break down the step-by-step psychological manipulation involved, making it terrifyingly clear how difficult it is for anyone to spot these elaborate deceptions when skilled con artists are using these advanced tools.
It makes you realize that effective defense isn't just about having the right software, but really understanding human psychology and manipulation tactics.
Precisely. It's a multi-layered defense.
You also mentioned the podcast tracing the historical context of cybercrime sometimes, like in an episode called Hackers, Freaks, and the Hunt for Par. How does looking back help understand current threats?
Yeah, that episode provided some invaluable historical context. It traced the roots of cybercrime right from the early days of, like, phone phreaking, where individuals manipulated telephone systems just to make free calls, all the way up to today's complex, global, interconnected threat landscape. It highlights how many of the foundational concepts of hacking and social engineering, although they've evolved technologically, have these surprising historical roots. Understanding where these threats originated gives you a much deeper appreciation for their current persistence and their complexity. It wasn't born yesterday.
And given Alberto's own history with the justice system, I have to imagine the discussions on legal injustices and systemic flaws feature pretty heavily and carry real personal weight for him as the host.
Oh, absolutely. It's a recurring and deeply personal theme. One particularly poignant example was an episode titled Reflections on Hacking, Justice, and Cybersecurity in Latin America. This discussion centered on the arrest and the, at the time, ongoing detention of his associate Vladi in Uruguay. Vladi was allegedly arrested for defacing government activism websites.
Okay, so what did the space explore there?
It dove into the legal maze surrounding the case, the perceived injustices, serious issues raised about the confidentiality of legal files being leaked, major questions about the digital evidence being presented, and what many in the space felt were disproportionately harsh charges for the alleged crime.
And this specific case discussion likely highlighted a much bigger systemic problem, right?
Yes, exactly. It starkly revealed what Alberto constantly emphasizes: the lack of cybersecurity expertise within Latin American legal systems. It's a systemic flaw he knows firsthand from his own traumatic case, where his ethical hacking and responsible disclosure efforts were tragically misunderstood by law enforcement and the judicial system simply because they didn't grasp the underlying technology or intent. This episode, like others, underscores this critical recurring theme: the dangerous gap between rapid technological advancement and these slow-to-adapt legal frameworks, creating environments ripe for misunderstanding and potential injustice.
It really sounds like these spaces, and thus the podcast, get right into the weeds, bring in perspectives you don't normally hear, or maybe perspectives that are intentionally obscured sometimes.
They absolutely do not shy away from controversial or difficult topics. Take that explosive episode titled Fianna in Dispositivos, which roughly translates to Revelations, Vulnerabilities of Trust in Mobile Devices. It featured Jonathan Scott, who identified himself as a mobile security engineer and a former law enforcement contractor. His claims during that space were genuinely alarming.
Okay, what exactly did he claim? What was so alarming?
He claimed to have found grave, persistent vulnerabilities in both Apple's iOS and Google's Android operating systems. Vulnerabilities that, he alleged, allow for stealthy, nearly undetectable extraction of data. He discussed creating tools for major companies like Verizon that could effectively bypass standard phone security protocols. And the most controversial part, he strongly implied there was collusion between governments and corporations to either create these backdoors or deliberately exploit existing flaws for surveillance purposes.
Wow. Implying government and corporate collusion on mobile vulnerabilities? That's huge. And didn't he compare his findings to Pegasus spyware?
Yes, that was the real bombshell. Pegasus, as many listeners will know, is that infamous zero-click spyware notorious for being used by governments to secretly surveil journalists, activists, dissidents around the globe. Scott claimed in the space that his findings make Pegasus look like child's play or a mere toy by comparison.
Making Pegasus look like a toy. That's an enormous, frankly chilling claim. Can you just remind listeners what zero-click means again?
Sure. Zero-click means the spyware can infect a target's phone without the user having to do anything at all. You don't have to click a bad link. You don't have to open a malicious file or attachment. It bypasses user interaction entirely. This isn't your typical phishing scam where you, the user, have to make a mistake. It's a silent, invisible attack that can potentially give an attacker total control over your device and all its data messages, calls, location, microphone, camera, everything.
So Scott claiming something even worse than Pegasus exists.
Exactly. It suggests something potentially even more sophisticated, even stealthier, and capable of bypassing current detection methods on a massive scale. This is the kind of profound, first-hand, potentially world-shaking account you get directly from these unscripted spaces, challenging everything we think we know about our digital security and privacy.
Truly chilling, the idea that our own devices could be compromised like that, perhaps even more easily than we currently understand.
Yeah.
What about activism? Anonymous gets mentioned a lot in cyber circles. Do they explore that world very deeply in the clip?
Yeah, there was a space titled something like Twitter Space with Spiderbyte clarifying things about hashtag anonymous and kind of AMA and Ask Me Anything session. It delved into these nuanced discussions about hacktivism. They explored Anonymous's very fluid, decentralized structure, which can be hard to grasp. They talked about the very real threats its members face, things like infiltration by state actors trying to disrupt them, and doxing, where their personal information, their real identities, are publicly exposed, putting them at great risk.
What are their goals, according to these discussions? Is it just broad anti-establishment sentiment, Or is there more focus?
Exposing corruption, particularly government and corporate corruption, was cited as a primary goal in that space. They also discussed how non-hackers, regular people, can participate in activism, broadening the definition beyond just technical exploits to include simply sharing knowledge, raising awareness, offering support online, fostering this wider sense of digital vigilance and collective action.
And they get technical, too.
Oh, yeah. They discussed how even today, government ministries can still be vulnerable to things like SQL injection, which, as we discussed, is a technique that really should be a legacy issue by now, but it persists due to outdated systems or simple oversight in code.
Right, that vulnerability where attackers slip malicious code into database queries to access or delete sensitive data. Persistence is kind of shocking.
It really is. It underscored how challenging basic cybersecurity maintenance remains, even for large official organizations, and how these supposedly old threats can still be very effective if defenses aren't kept up to date. And the spaces also provide these unsettling glimpses into the darker corners of the internet. I recall one instance where a former black hat hacker joined a space to describe, quite casually, hitman services selling stolen identities, operating on the dark web, just offering this disturbing first-hand account of that chilling criminal underworld.
It sounds like they cover a monumental range of issues, really reflecting the complexity of the digital world. What about things like national surveillance or the vulnerability of critical infrastructure?
Definitely. Those come up frequently. One episode explored Uruguay's evolving digital surveillance landscape. They discussed a new cybersecurity decree, but also critically scrutinized El Guardian, which is apparently a secretive surveillance system that has raised significant privacy alarms within the country. Another space focused on Mexico's surveillance law, highlighting a new spy law giving authorities broad access to personal data, which raised serious abuse concerns, especially coming after their notorious Pegasus scandal involving government spying on its own citizens.
That tension between national security needs and individual privacy rights is always such a fraught area.
Always. And then there was an update from a Twitter space discussing what was described as Europe's largest energy outage, speculating about a massive power outage that occurred in Spain. The discussion weighed the official explanations against the possibility of it being a coordinated cyber attack. It starkly highlighted the profound vulnerability of critical national infrastructure, power grids, water systems, transportation to digital threats. These are the kinds of raw, speculative, but deeply important conversations that offer perspectives often hidden from mainstream public view.
And throughout all these complex, often jilling, sometimes highly technical discussions, Alberto's hosting style, drawing from his personal journey, creating that open, non-judgmental forum, seems absolutely crucial. It's what fosters the candor, the courageous sharing from guests, that makes the Cybermidnight Club's content so rich, so impactful, and fundamentally different from almost anything else out there. It feels like the direct result of the podcast's unique evolution, born from his trauma but transformed into this public platform.
Absolutely. His lived experience isn't just backstory, it's the lens through which these conversations happen, and it grants him a unique credibility and empathy that allows these difficult truths to emerge.
So what's the ripple effect? What happens when one person shares their story of injustice with such radical transparency and builds this platform around it? For Alberto, it sounds like it's led to shifts far beyond his initial online reach, demonstrating this powerful impact the Cybermidnight Club's approach can have.
That's really the key question, isn't it? And the effects have been significant. Those spaces, that unique convergence you get of victims, former criminals, and experts all talking openly, it's incredibly powerful for generating insights you wouldn't get otherwise. It becomes more than just sharing information. It's like collaboratively building a collective defense in real time.
How does that work in practice? Like crowdsourcing safety tips?
Exactly like that. It becomes this truly safe space where people can share their experiences, often traumatic ones, without fear of judgment or blame. And then, collaboratively, they start figuring out ways to protect themselves and others. You'll hear listeners share specific scam attempts they've encountered, and others in the space will immediately jump in, identifying patterns, red flags, technical details. You might have former criminals advising on typical attack patterns or the psychological manipulations scammers use. The community amplifies the individual story, turning personal trauma into this shared shield through mutual support and knowledge exchange.
So his personal story, amplified digitally by this growing, engaged community, it gained unexpected global reach then.
Beyond.
Uruguay.
Massively beyond. He recounts connecting with a major figure in Germany purely via Twitter, which then led to his story being broadcast worldwide. It just shows the immense power of these digital platforms to transcend borders and amplify voices that traditional media might otherwise ignore or even actively suppress, as was the case for him locally. This global recognition was this profound validation after years of being silenced in his own country.
But perhaps the most astonishing ripple effect, the most incredible turnaround in this whole story, is him ending up advising the Uruguayan Congress. I mean, from prisoner to advisor to the very system that wronged him. That sounds almost unbelievable. How did that even happen?
It's an astonishing testament to the power of persistent, authentic advocacy fueled by his platform. He used his own case, his 8-month ordeal, his acquittal, as this living, undeniable example of the profound flaws within Uruguay's legal and judicial system when it came to handling cybercrime and digital evidence. His consistent and persistent advocacy, which included direct testimonies to Congress, his relentless public advocacy via Twitter Spaces, and crucially, presenting real-world case studies and systemic failures drawn directly from the Cybermidnight Club discussions, made the evidence just undeniable.
He basically forced them to confront the reality through his own experience and the stories shared on his platform.
Exactly. It created this irresistible impetus for change, despite any initial institutional resistance you might expect. He effectively became a consultant and advisor to the very system that had once targeted him.
And this wasn't just talk, right? Were there specific tangible changes that resulted from his advocacy in Uruguay's cybersecurity infrastructure?
Oh, yes. Significant high-level changes. He recounts that former directors of cybersecurity at Interpol, presumably the Uruguayan branch or liaison, the head of the Uruguayan CERT, their National Computer Emergency Response Team, and even the head of security for the presidency were removed or replaced in the wake of his advocacy and the issues brought to light.
Wow, that's a massive shakeup at the highest levels of national security and cyber defense.
It really is. Furthermore, a completely new structure was apparently put in place, a dedicated cybersecurity unit staffed with properly trained professionals, and critically, a new cybercrime prosecutor, one who knows Alberto's case intimately and understands the technical nuances, has been appointed. This demonstrates a real, tangible, institutional, systemic response to the issues he exposed and tirelessly advocated against, using his platform as the amplifier.
And his core message, the one echoing through all of this, through the podcast, through the advocacy, it remains incredibly powerful and consistent, doesn't it?
Share your story. That's the constant refrain. He emphasizes again and again that as painful as it might be, as difficult as it is to relive trauma, sharing your experience could save just one other person from going through the same thing. The reward, he stresses, isn't really for you when you speak out. It's for the countless others out there who might be vulnerable to similar threats or scams or injustices.
So that message directly combats the shame, the victim blaming, that historically keeps victims silent. It fights against that statistic you mentioned, that only 7% to 14% of cybercrimes even get reported.
Exactly. By providing this unique platform for raw, unfiltered stories, he's actively breaking the stigma, empowering victims, and encouraging this collective, proactive stance against the criminals who absolutely thrive on silence and shame.
It's just a powerful model for turning profound personal pain into collective public protection. Alberto Daniel Hill's journey and the evolution of the Cybermidnight Club out of it is truly extraordinary. A real testament to resilience and, indeed, the transformative power of digital platforms when they're used for genuine connection and fearless advocacy.
His personal log into hell, those incredibly dark, isolating times, truly did become a log out to hope for so many people. And his experiences channeled through the podcast are now actively shaping a more just and secure digital future, certainly in Uruguay. And his voice is inspiring others globally to find their own voices, share their truths, and join that vital collective defense against these ever-evolving cyber threats.
And connecting it back to the bigger picture, for you, the listener, it really makes you think, doesn't it? Especially listening to a deep dive like this. Given the absolute proliferation of information and misinformation and outright deception online today, what does it truly mean for you to really know someone or even to trust information in this digital age?
Yeah, especially with so much mediation, right? So much potentially AI-generated content coming down the pipeline, so much intentional deception out there designed to manipulate us. How do we collectively sift through all that noise to find actual authenticity, to find voices we can genuinely trust?
And maybe crucially, how will our collective courage, our own willingness to share our vulnerabilities and experiences when appropriate, and maybe more importantly, to truly listen to authentic voices, like those amplified by platforms like the Cybermidnight Club, How will that shape online interaction moving forward?
Particularly as technology continues to blur those lines faster and faster between what's real, what's fake, what's human, and what's machine-generated. It's a profound challenge.
It really is. And that's a thought for you to take away as you navigate this complex, interconnected, often confusing digital world we all live in now.